We've been missing you. Do you want to find the witch friends you've been missing? Do you want to participate in these conversations live? And do you want to support the work of recovering a true history of feminist ideas about magic? Do you want to hang out? Do you want an invite to Zoom together with Amy and myself every new moon, along with our hilarious, diverse, wise, queer, creative, anti-racist, science, and awe-loving coven? You must join the Missing Witches Patreon. It's pay what you can, and we can't wait to meet you there. Patreon.com/missingwitches.
You aren't being a proper woman, therefore you must be a witch. You must be a witch.
Welcome, so many wise friends. It is such a pleasure to see you here today. Oh, I'm going to just take a big shoulder roll and deep breath and just feel so excited as I see your faces appearing. I just feel electrified by your smiles and your expectation and your hopefulness and your decision just to be here. It's Ostara. So we are planting a seed together. And for this Ostara, myself and Amy, who are co-authors of the book Missing Witches and co-hosts of the Missing Witches podcast, we want to open a circle that is about new ways of imagining the possible. We think that that is what we're here to do. If you identify as witch or you don't, part of what draws us to the word witch is this sense of the unpredictable and this belief that we can cast a spell, make a change, enchant for something new, that it's worth believing that the world can change. And part of what we go looking for at Missing Witches is stories that have been excluded, because it's like a work of speculative fiction. We're asking, what can the world be like if we find the stories that were occulted or marginalized? What can that world be, really? You know, it's about having faith, I think, that the world can be other than it is, in its extreme injustice. We come together to believe that it can be different, and that by coming together, we make it different. And we see as leaders for us in that the thinkers that we've invited here today. And in part, that's because of the way that they draw on their neurodivergence to offer what they see and how they see as a gift to the rest of us. And they'll be better able to speak about that than I will, but that's the context for today. I want to open with a small ritual, and then Amy will do a little reading, and then we'll invite our guests to introduce themselves and introduce the questions that they brought to the circle today. So I want to begin by inviting you to be as comfortable as you can be in the body that you're in, the space that you're in, the systems of systemic racism and injustice, capitalism, constant crushing fears. Let's not deny that those things impede on our comfort. But to find in this moment whatever ease is possible to you. We invite you to lie down, turn off your camera, come close to the camera, fidget, do whatever makes sense in your body. Sway a little bit if that feels good for you. And then if this is available to you and comfortable to you, consider removing the mask. Gently touch your face if that feels good to you, the muscles of your face, and wipe away in all those tiny ways we hold our face. Whatever you've been feeling, you've had to hold to make a mask. This is a space where we invite you to drop your masks and be with us as the wild, magic, strange, flickering life form that you are. And if there are other comfort gestures that you enjoy, touch your hands, rub your hair, smell the inside of your elbow. We also invite you, if you are going to speak in this circle or introduce yourself in the chat or share in any way, to feel comfortable doing so in a way that's natural to you. If it feels good to apologize, then apologize, but don't feel like you need to. So if you go off on a tangent, if you lose your train of thought, if you start something and end up somewhere different, those are things I think we feel so much pressure to apologize for, but maybe that's part of being kept in linear time, right? And so this is an opening where I hope you feel comfortable to spiral and stumble and open up questions, go quiet, ask us all to be quiet for a second if it feels too hectic. This is that kind of a space, okay? That's my opening. Welcome to the circle today.
Thank you, Risa, so much for that ritual of unmasking. I think that part of the pressure of capitalism is to fit into the norm, and we as witches of all varieties, the one thing that we are comfortable with is being different. I will describe myself. My name is Amy. I have long gray hair. I'm a white woman in her 40s, and I'm proudly wearing my t-shirt today that says "Stay Weird." And I just want to give a big open and loving space to all of our differences, and to conjure the spirit of Audre Lorde, who knew that differences are advantageous when we work together. That's the only way that we can make a full picture of our humanity, is when we all come together like we're doing today. So I wanted to read something that Risa wrote. It's always a joy to read to each other and to have our work read to us by each other. This is from our book, Missing Witches, Recovering True Histories of Feminist Magic. Thank you all again so much for being here. It is Ostara, Eostar. It is the spring equinox. Dark and light reach another point of balance on the spinning wheel. Light is increasing quickly, and the darkness will recede. But for this moment, they breathe together. This is the ancient goddess holiday that gives us bunnies and baby chicks. This is the pagan story overwritten by the peace-loving anarchist hippie Jesus's execution, descent, and return. In honor of the beginning of spring, we can ritualize an opening for new ideas and new ways of thinking. On the spring equinox, day and night are equal. Our shadows, personal and collective, look us in the eye, and they can heal and guide us.
So with that, we would love to invite our panelists, our guests, our wise ones, to one by one introduce yourselves, share a bit about your projects, what you've been working on, what you've been thinking about, and then share your question. And then we'll play it daisy chain style. We'll have you call on the next person so we can sort of step back and let you all step to the forefront. To start, I'll invite a collaborator and coven mate who has been helping us improve our own approach to accessibility in a way that has felt really gentle and encouraging, and a way that made space for both of us to do it and not feel guilt or shame or rush or capitalist pressure. I will share this with you from Julie's signature and then invite her to introduce herself. Julie's recently added to her email signature after it says, Julie Nowak, Masters of Education, she, they pronouns, educator, activist, writer, consultant, founder of the Seasonal Body. I reject the ableist urgency model of our culture and do not apologize for disability-related absences or response times. Thanks, Julie. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm so happy to be here. So as Risa said, my name is Julie Nowak. I use she, her, or they, them pronouns. I live near Toronto, which is the Indigenous name for what we colonially call Toronto in Canada. To describe what I look like, I'm a white person with relatively short brown hair. I'm wearing a black top and red headset. Ooh, touching it probably made noise. And I'm in front of a blue wall. And I am an activist and an educator and consultant doing work around disability justice and body liberation and nature connection and food justice through a project I started called The Seasonal Body. I came to this in part based on my own experience of finding healing in relation to eating disorders through farming and connecting with nature. And now a lot of my work is focused on making the connections between disability justice and nature as well. In the spirit of challenging capitalism, I want to name aspects of my life that are separate from productivity because I'm trying to decouple that that's where my worth is. And so the majority of my time as a chronically ill person is spent resting and taking care of myself. And my main form of income is social assistance, which I name because I want to destigmatize that and say that many disabled and chronically ill folks, our income is from social assistance. And I want us all to work on getting us to get more money from social assistance because it's not enough to live on. So wherever you are, like me in Canada or in the US, the system and the bureaucracy of that sucks. And so a lot of my time goes to navigating the system, to be honest. And that being said, I'm very passionate about some of my creative projects. I'm currently creating a podcast that is trying to make nature connection more accessible to folks who are homebound like me. So I'm creating experiential nature connection activities that can kind of be like ecotherapy from wherever you are. And I just launched a Patreon if anyone wants to help kickstart that. But I know there are many here who have Patreon, so I encourage you to support them all. And my question for this group, I have a lot of questions, but the one I will bring to the space is asking us how we can collectively make our spiritual spaces more accessible and welcoming to neurodivergent folks on a practical level, on an ideological level, all that. So that's where I will go with that. And next I will pass this to Brandy.
Thank you so much, Julie, and thank you everyone for having me here. It's such an honor. My name is Brandy, and I am a Black woman. I have medium brown skin. I have Black curly hair. I'm currently wearing a purple top and a Black choker, a Black nose ring, and I have a moon tapestry in the background that has purple moons on it. So I'm Cancer rising, and the moon really calls to me. I am ADHD, so where do I go next?
Do you want to share some of your projects and then your question?
Okay. Some of the projects that I'm currently working on, I do have a presence on Instagram, but I am kind of migrating more towards YouTube because I love to make long form content. So I'm doing collective monthly readings as well as readings for all of the signs. So for your sun, moon, and rising, but I do more of soul tarot rather than predictive tarot. My lineage comes from Tarot for the Wild Soul with Lindsay Mack, if you've heard of her. So I really resonate with that type of tarot because her motto about the tarot is that if it doesn't include everyone, it doesn't include anyone. So that level of inclusivity really spoke to me because when I started looking at tarot videos and really got into astrology, there wasn't a lot out there that made space for marginalized identities, that there were some things that really felt like they left out people who looked like me or had the lifestyle that I have. Like, I am a chronically disabled person, a chronically ill person. I also am a person I am autistic and I have ADHD. I am recovering from birth trauma and depression, constantly working on that. So, to hear this person is an energy vampire, or, many of the other terms that you hear in the tarot space that's on YouTube really did not make me feel welcome. So I am creating the space that I would have wanted to see. And part of that is I really love astrology. I'm an intuitive astrologer, still a student of Hellenistic and modern astrology. So I incorporate astrology into my tarot practice, and I am rebooting a podcast that I started last year called Venus in Retrocast. So it's all about making connections between the cards using the astrological rulerships. And I'm really excited to do this in a visual way on my YouTube. I kind of think of it as my lemonade, from, Beyonce's visual album, because as a neurodivergent person, I'm very visual. So doing it in a space that was completely audio based, it created some barriers for me. So I was like, why not work it in a way that works for me? So, and another project that I have coming up is that I made my own tarot spread question deck. So I am going to be putting that Kickstarter out this summer. And then, just like Julie said, outside of the capitalist system, I am on disability, and I have been since 2012. So really feeling that, that resonance with what she said about how unjust the disability system is for people who need that assistance to live. Because if I wasn't married, if I didn't have a husband who earned an income, my life would look very different than it does. And I feel very fortunate for that. But at the same time, I feel like I should be able to support myself no matter what. And that should be for everyone. Everyone should have a basic standard of living. So I'm a big believer in that, and divesting from capitalism. Yeah, and the question that I posed, let me look at it, was what was one of the biggest barriers for you in deepening your practice or entering into any kind of practice around witchcraft, tarot, any spiritual practice? And then what traditional rules did you find unnecessary or a way of gatekeeping neurodivergent people out of this space? And then what advice can you give to anyone who is new that feels caught in this dynamic? And I will pass this on to Sarah.
I'm Sarah. I'm coming to y'all from Denver, Colorado. Usually I'm in LA on unceded Tongva land. And just to describe what I look like, I'm a white person with brown hair and glasses. I'm wearing earrings that are made of dead beetles, and I'm in my grandmother's office surrounded by her angel figurines and her sticky notes. And I let the group know this, but my grandmother passed a couple days ago. I'm actually in Denver attending her Shiva / wake, which we've been calling a shwake, which I think is hilarious. And I'm really thrilled to be here. Thank you so much for having me and creating a panel of these kinds of voices. My current projects, so I am actually by profession a screenwriter and director in Hollywood. That's why I live in LA. I love that work. And also I think it kind of lacks a certain degree of depth in the spiritual realms. And so I have really found a home for myself in my spiritual practice and in the spiritual communities that exist in LA. I am a professional tarot reader as well. I've been doing tarot since I was like a 12-year-old. And for better or for worse, I had some pretty challenging experiences with the tarot as a teenager, and very eye-opening experiences. And tarot has become something I trust, like a very good friend. And my projects right now that are kind of in that space include a book about the tarot that I'm writing, but it's more through the lens of using tarot for creative practice, also interrogating gender within the tarot, and the binaries of magic in general, and coming to it from like a pretty non-dual perspective, as well as engaging some of these questions around neurodiversity. So I identify as neuroqueer, and my relationship to that comes through having a multi-layered experience around neurodivergence that has, and having some resistance also to the labels and the idea of the DSM in general as something crafted by cishet white men to other people. So I want to engage that while also recognizing the value of finding community and finding labels that help us connect to each other. But I have a few types of neurodivergence, and I think the one that feels the most engaged right now is my synesthesia, which I have two kinds of. In this exact moment, I'm having some pretty visceral experiences, which is very interesting. And also I have ADHD, and I'm a highly sensitive person, and I also am on the autism spectrum. So there's a range of interacting identities, and I've been delighting in understanding how those things connect to each other and mapping them out in my experience. And the questions that I brought for the group are pretty surface level, but they feel really crucial to me in sort of understanding the link between neurodivergence and magic. So my question is wondering if there is a historical or potentially past life link between these two ideas, and are these different ways of being and seeing and doing coming from the is it a chicken and egg situation? Where do these begin and where they end? I've been also really thinking about the idea of wound and gift. And I think every aspect of our gift is also seated in some way as a wound. And I really see for myself, and this is just speaking to my own experience, that my neurodivergent feels that way. Like the hypervigilance I have around other people has led me to be, as a fellow Cancer rising, a very empathetic, engaged tarot reader. And also it creates an enormous amount of anxiety and stress in my own body. And so there's just a really interesting conversation, I think, to be had for how these things emerge, and the huge overlap. Like almost everybody I know who is neurodivergent is also a witch or somehow connected to the magic community. So that's me. And I will popcorn this over to Lynx/Amanda, who I haven't gotten a chance to meet yet.
Hi, Gwe Medawolodio Gelotto Apuksɨkn Lynx, Unamagi, Wagmacook First Nation, Wedabexit, Montreal Delawi, Wiggy Guelph, Ontario, Nina Two Spirit Bowinisk. I just introduced myself firstly as an attempt at language revitalization and reclaiming Indigenous space. It's something that's really new to me, but I just said that my name is Lynx or Amanda. My spirit name is Gelotto, which means the one who leaves footprints. And my Indigenous ties are to Unamagi, particularly Wagmacook First Nation and Nyanza area. I'm an urban mixed Mi'kmaq person who identifies as two-spirit and queer. I'm currently living in Guelph, but was born and raised in Montreal, Quebec. And I use the word Bowinisk, which is the Mi'kmaq word for witch, and it also kind of aligns with new terminology that's used for two-spirit folk, which is a really interesting like derivation and etymology. So some people claim that, some people use other words to describe themselves. I use she, they, or negum pronouns. Negum is the singular they word in Mi'kmaq, which is really nice. In terms of a physical description of myself, I'm a light-skinned Indigenous person with dyed blonde hair and I guess like yellow-rimmed glasses, wearing a black turtleneck, hot pink top over top of it, and a beaded bolo tie made by an Indigenous friend of mine. And I'm sitting in an office with a couple of, like a door behind me and some cat toys and stuff. In terms of me and what I do, a little bit of a multi-hyphenate, practicing astrologer that uses intuitive mostly, but borrows from modern and Hellenistic and is trying to find ways to like bring Indigenous star knowledges back to that. Dabble in tarot and energy work, but most of the time work as a visual artist and facilitator. Some of the recent things that I've been working on have been creating and designing spaces for two-spirit youth virtually during the pandemic to ideate and think about a gender fluid regalia dance style, which is something that kind of intersects with multiple identities, but approaches colonialism in the ways that people are often ostracized from accessing ceremony. And yeah, just making stuff. In terms of neurodivergence, it's a really new thing that I've attached to my identity and is unraveling and being loved back into myself. So in terms of that, I live with ADHD and autism level 1. And also I'm a Cancer rising too. So it's a full house of us, which is kind of neat.
Before you pass the mic, Amanda, can you repeat that word that you used in lieu of witch and maybe spell it even?
Sure.
I had never heard it before, so I'm really excited to dig into this.
Let me see if I can spell it.
Yeah.
Right. It's Puin apostrophe SKW. So the P sounds kind of like a B, a Bowen.
I love
Thank
that
you
so much too. Would you also share your questions before you daisy chain us along?
For sure. Some neurodivergent gifts and special skills include enhanced perception and pattern recognition. Is this true for you? In what ways does it influence your magical practice? Do you experience synesthesia? What is your opinion on people using terms like indigo children or HSP, highly sensitive person, as a neurodivergent witch? In what ways have these terms been stigmatizing for neurodivergent and autistic people and witches? And the DSM's been highly problematic for people on the spectrum, as well as those who identify with mental health diagnoses. At one point, autism was only characterized under schizophrenia. Asperger's syndrome was coined by Hans Asperger, who was a eugenicist. What are some reflections you have on the neurodivergent spectrum? Would you categorize these disorders, unquotes, differently if you could rewrite the DSM and how neurodivergence is perceived? Well, I'll pass the mic over to Marcella.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Marcella. My pronouns are she, her. I am currently in Pavanga, the Tonga Spiritual Center, also known as Long Beach, California, but I am from the East Coast originally. I am a autistic, multiracial person. I am really finding as an older, I hate even saying elder witch, I'm going to be 45 on March 20th, and I've been doing this a very long time, and I'm still finding my footing on how to talk publicly. For visuals and inclusivity, I am wearing, I call it my emotional support hoodie. It's a beat up black hoodie with a Bad Brains patch on it. And I wear it often because it's very comfortable and feels good on my body. I'm pale in complexion, but olive toned. I have a lot of ancestral tattoos that I have been working into my body over the years as I reclaim and connect back to my roots and my multi-racial and cultural diversity. I'm wearing a wampum shell to connect to my Wampanoag relatives and ancestors. And yeah, I'm in my little office area. When I was asked to do this, I was really grateful. There are not many places to speak on neurodiversity, and there are more and more of us coming forward, or at least being more visible. I did not receive a diagnosis until 2019, and I'm also like a firm believer in self-diagnosis as a key to finding your path. There are multiple things that I've been working on. I've been a full-time reader since 2009 and offering tarot introductory classes for teens and tweens through the Los Angeles Public Library. And I've been reading cards since 1995. I am a very vocal, recovering addict, alcoholic, and magic and witchcraft have definitely helped me find my way in my discovery of self when I did not have anyone to talk to growing up in Rhode Island. And only in the last 4 years, I did find out that that I come from not just on my mother's side, but my father's side. There's a lot of magical wounded people and institutionalized women, including my grandmother and my great-grandmother, who were seers. And so a lot of my work, I realize at this point, is about creating healing spaces for those who reside in the liminal. I've also had multiple near-death experiences. I don't feel like I fit in anywhere. And I've felt like that my whole life. And I still feel like that, even in places that welcome me, because I'm so in and out of, I guess, the physical world and even my own body a lot of the time. So I create decks, a lot of them, and I create classes or books and things that I've been working on, mainly as an artist first and a sensitive person, or empathic and intuitive, psychic second. And I feel like when I can create artistically, it's the way that I can make the energy physical. And again, I really think that part of my path in this current life is to create spaces spiritually for those who come from oppressed lineages, or people who's had their culture stolen or taken or had to hide from it. I create spaces for them to connect back to it. And I'd like to create more of a reverence for that, because as a multi-racial person, it's not been a place that I feel like I have the kind of connection, right? Or I don't know if that's a proper way of saying it, but like, it's hard for me to go into spaces and feel like not an imposter or like I'm overstepping. So how do we create these spaces where you can reconnect and honor your lineages, your bloodlines, and your own neurodiversity in ways that are respectful and honor those who came before, but also honor the autonomy of who you are and where you are headed to best support you on your path? And my question was very much like the start of this, is how can we unmask in our magic? I found that through performance ritual, that's really helped me, even though like I have not been able to do that in some time since the current pandemic. But thank you. I like to say thank you in some of the languages that I'm reconnecting to. So I like to say grazie, that's Italian, obrigado in Portuguese, salamat, Filipino, tagala, and kushapataj. And I'm still trying to find a Wampanoag teacher to learn how to speak more Wampanoag. Thank you. And I'm going to daisy chain it to Lucy.
Hello, my name is Lucy Pearce and I am based in Ireland. I'm Anglo-Irish, living on the south coast of Ireland, the Celtic Sea. I am sat here with my tabby cat on my chest, who's helping me to feel a little calmer. I've got medium length, about half grey, half dark hair. I'm in my early 40s. I've got pink glasses and my very, very soft, cozy, comforting butterfly scarf, which I wrap myself in for interviews so I don't feel so scared. So I am a mother of 3 and I am the founder of Womancraft Publishing, which publishes life-changing, paradigm-shifting books by women for women. And I am an author of a ridiculous-sounding 10 books. I am prolific in my creativity. I'm a visual artist. I'm currently illustrating a new one of our books, which excuse me, I've had COVID for the last week, so I haven't done much talking and sound a bit chestier than normal. So I've been in bed, not able to do much, but drawing for about 6 or 7 hours a day, illustrating the Kitchen Witch companion book that we are putting together. And we've just launched the Kitchen Witch, the first Kitchen Witch book. So it's really exciting to be able to do something from bed. And bed is where I do most of my work from. I'm late diagnosed autistic and ADHD, a lot of chronic health stuff, which I wrote about in my book, Medicine Woman. And I really enjoy working. People kind of refer to me, and in my head, I kind of think I should refer to myself as an author because that's what I've done the most of. I've written, almost 1 million words in the last decade in book form. But actually, word and image, the intersection between word and image is where it is for me. That kind of magic space where ideas take form. And sometimes they come through words and sometimes they come through images and sometimes they require both. And that's what I love to work with most. And my question is, how can we learn to work together when working together is so tricky and challenging for us when we are neurodivergent?
Thank you everyone so much for opening up in such thoughtful ways. When we ask guests to introduce themselves, I think that's always what Amy and I are hoping for, is like, take us deep into the emotional world of your projects. Let us see it from that place that you all just shared it from. So that was incredibly generous, and we thank you for that. I didn't describe myself at the beginning. I get really flustered when I do these things, so I'm going to do it now. I'm an early 40s white woman with messy brown hair and a brown sweater, and I podcast from my partners and my studio, so there's a lot of leather work hanging behind me, and I have multiple barrettes in my hair because my kid did my hair before today. That felt good to do. Julie suggested we do that as part of our ongoing kind of reaching outward, and it feels really nice. I want to just open it at this point, and I hope you'll allow it. Amy's done us the generosity of putting all of the questions in the chat. So panelists, if there was something that was asked that you felt fired up about or you wanted to add your thoughts on.
I'm going to, as a non-panelist,
take it, Ames.
Take it away, Amy. Because I'm really interested in Brandy's question about what barriers or gatekeeping you have found as an ND person And if you can describe those to us so that we can be conscious in our goings on that we're not replicating these things. So maybe we'll start with Brandy, since it was your question.
One of the biggest things, especially in tarot, was especially thinking as a neurodivergent person, sometimes we can be very literal, or at least speaking for myself. Like when it comes to rules, I'm a Capricorn moon and we follow rules. Simple things like you have to be gifted your first tarot deck. You could be waiting forever if you come from a traditional family that doesn't believe in, tarot and thinks it's work of the devil. Throw that shit out. I'm sorry. And buy your own deck. I don't think I would have ever gotten started if I had to wait for someone to gift me my own deck. And then the ways that, especially if we're looking at the economy, you need this crystal or you need this ingredient to make your spell work, or you have to really set your intention and focus. Well, what does that mean if you're ADHD and your mind is going here, there, and everywhere, and you're trying to cast? There have to be workarounds around that. And actually, I posted on Instagram for anybody, neurodivergent or not, if you can't hold your tarot question or your intention in your head, write it down on a piece of paper. It will hold the space for you. And I find that it works all the time, and that was one of the biggest reasons that I created my spread deck. I thought it was interesting because sometimes we don't know what to ask, or we would just, I think it's interesting to let fate decide. But it's a nice space holder for you to have this question right there. And then you shuffle the cards and see what comes out. But you don't have to sit there and worry about, oh, my mind is wondering. The cards aren't going to show up with the answers that I need because I'm thinking about something else. That's the wonderful thing about so many neurodivergent practitioners and witches and tarot readers coming forward, is that we're filling that need for other people who are seeking what it is that we couldn't find. It's like need is the mother of all invention. I'm so thankful for other voices that I've found, on social media, who really gave me the license to kind of throw some of those things away and, just kind of create a practice that works for me. And I'm still learning. It's a journey, but yeah, I can see where if you're brand new and you have a certain idea of the way things are supposed to be based on tradition or what you've read in a book, it can really frustrate a person into not even wanting to start. And that's something that really makes me sad and upset, because I think it keeps a lot of people out that really should and have a right to be here.
Does anyone else want to speak to this question?
Sure, I will. This is Julie speaking. I think what comes most to my mind is, so my neurodivergent comes from traumatic brain injury, and it has affected my ability to be concise. And it feels like in some spaces, this whole concept of taking up space is this sticky thing for me. And so I have found that as a barrier for, some more spiritual type spaces where I feel like I have to be so guarded and careful with my words, or else, I'm concerned I'll be perceived in a particular way. And people even sometimes make comments about that as well.
Hi, it's Sarah. I am finding myself called to speak to the sort of flip side of that. And while simultaneously acknowledging, of course, everything that was shared, it feels very real and very true to me. And also realizing that for me, in some ways, accessing magical spaces was the first time I felt like I could communicate things I don't have an inner monologue. I don't think in words, I think in pictures. And so all of my life is translation, and sometimes triple translation. and being in a magical space, being in a tarot space was sort of the first time and maybe this was a choice I made, but gave myself permission to say, this is the image that's coming up for me when you say that, or this is how I'm processing this as an abstract concept. And I found that permission was really necessary and beautiful, and also feels very specific to magical spaces, but has allowed me to then bring that into non-magical spaces as well. I was really feeling called to express the permission. I mean, there's always both, because that's unfortunately the society that we live in, but the permission felt really crucial too.
So I'm interested in where that takes us in terms of Julie's other question: what can neurodivergent folks teach spiritual communities in the world?
There's so many things I want to pull on from all of these questions. And, being autistic and being a reader and, kind of making sure that we give ourselves, just speaking from the reader's perspective or the person holding the space for others, giving ourselves the space and time to process things without feeling a rush or an urgency to fix or have a concrete answer is so important. And it allows us to find nuance in how we're deciphering or delivering a message. I think there is a lot of urgency sometimes in this sense of we have to be called to action. We have to have an answer. And sometimes we don't have answers, or we need space. Just from my own experience, like I don't do events anymore, really. I can't, and I haven't in a while, because they become like system overload for me personally. And it's like either I'm getting way too much information, and only one thing is blaring out, or I've had situations where I actually had a woman follow me into a closet at an event space trying to get me to talk to her. She wouldn't take the cue. So I wish there were more people that understood maybe certain, or said, what are your warning signs? Like, what's your words when you need a little bit of more grounding or tethering or understanding through this, through these sessions or through this work. And I think we can teach maybe more neurotypical folks how to honor their own nervous system boundaries and sensory situations by knowing that not everything is a crisis or an emergency needing to be answered in that moment. And sometimes things like life need to develop and grow like a plant, it's like you don't, there's that saying, like, you don't plant the seed and then have the plant there, you have to wait for things to develop, just like you develop. Right. My practice is consistently changing and growing. I obviously don't have the same practice that I had at 17 or 18 emerging out of rehab. Like, there's constant room for growth and readjustment and evolution and course correction, and I also think, to touch on, I don't remember whose question it was, someone asked about, the capitalism factor of all of this. And I think there is such a business end of things that neurodiverse people get pushed to, like, well, you should just do it because you're going to make money. And I can't tell you how many situations or relationships blew up because I did not have the capacity to keep up with what was needed. And it was pre-diagnosis. So, I just think that there needs to be more allowance for individuals' own bandwidth or battery levels. And it has to be on an individual basis. It can't just be like one blanket thing, because everyone is so different and operates and works differently. Teaching people that, to be more deliberate or aware, or it's just a different, I don't know. I always see my autism as being, I have a different operating system. So I try to explain to people that way. And they seem to get it when I'm like, you're running on OS whatever, and I'm running on this. And then they seem to get it. So that's one way of putting it.
Thanks for that. I think that's a useful metaphor. And it goes back to, Julie linked me to an article about crib time when we were starting to work together a little bit. It does go back, I think, to something that is a real gift to all of us. It's like let's unclench from this like terror of productivity a little bit. And if we can learn to adjust that way because of each other's operating systems, that will be a greater gift. I want to pass to Lynx to Amanda, because I know you have to go teach some kiddos right at 3:30. And I would love it if you had a chance to respond to any of these questions that jumped out for you.
I have no idea how to segue right now, but I appreciate this.
I am really interested in the idea of what your neurodivergence can teach the world, or teach witches. What does it teach us about our practice? How does it inform your art? What are you learning from it? And then also on this flip side, like, what are ways that we need to be more accommodating to each other's operating systems? Those are two that stood out for me, but there are a lot of really great questions. And we will share all these questions on our social and on our website afterwards when we share this whole episode and the transcript. So consider these conversation starting points.
Okay, maybe I'll just kind of do like a word vomit of all of the things that were evoked with the questions. It was like how to unmask more. So like leaning into talking to plants and spirits, and being on a lifelong journey of trusting your inner voice, and knowing that that's been something that has not always been true for myself as somebody who has had the experiences I've had. So having that language of neurodivergence to reparent yourself and reclaim early life experiences, your connection to the mystical, without that self-awareness, you end up hanging on to societal notions of guilt. I think there's always kind of social norms around talking taboo that kind of come into play when I don't know, I feel like it envelops a bit of everything. And then there was a question about past life links between neurodivergence and magic. And I just had this sense to go into astrology. So like in astrology, we can look at nodal patterns and chart themes, Chiron or Pluto aspects, nodal squares in evolutionary astrology. So often themes like persecution or placements of asteroids like Hecate and other asteroids that are very tight in orb to a personal planet can speak to repeating or trending archetypes and form like an inner dialogue or reflection. Sometimes the soul has urgency to fix past life problems, or a person will be in a different life situation to settle old karma. For example, being autocratic or a leader in a past life, and in this life, having a disability or social difficulties to develop empathy and develop those parts of self further. And I think around barriers to deepening practice, it had a lot to do with colonialism. So always kind of being bad at history and geography in like school, I realized that it had a lot to do with colonialism, and not remembering the names and history had to do with uncovered and lost histories. So a lot of obfuscating or hiding the truth in general, and kind of just trusting that not knowing those things or not feeling like those stories fit is actually part of our truth telling. When I was in my mid to late 20s, I started connecting more with Ilnu, Mi'kmaq practices, and then everything started clicking. So when it comes to like melting pot's a weird word, but when it comes to all of that, like we have all of these deities and practices that sort of mishmash, and there's a responsibility to ourselves to like come into our identities, and knowing that you don't need to blame yourself if you don't know your full history because of that colonial piece a lot as well, but also knowing that the things that we're drawn to has a lot to do with our ancient lineages. It has a lot to do with the things that call to us and and called to our gifts. So like knowing that we can be ethically responsible by undergoing that process of really like claiming parts of our identity that have been hidden or maybe even marginalized, or knowing that the way that people in charge erased us, you know, that violence put upon us, even as people who are late diagnosed autistic, who are in that female spectrum of things too. So that language wasn't there before. That has often kind of looked at our own shame and guilt and trying to add masks to be socially adjusted in certain ways. So getting through that unraveling process and trusting yourself a little bit when it comes to like not taking on and adopting years and years of self-belief. And I'm getting distracted by the chat, but I'm just trying to keep a train of thought. Kind of I don't know, I think I said quite a bit, maybe. Like they're like little morsels I'm sure other people are like gonna trickle into maybe.
I think you said a lot too. And I think we don't have to be trains. We can be sprouts of thought or something. Lucy, we haven't heard from you in a bit. Do you feel like there are some sprouts in there you want to sprout along with?
Yeah, definitely. The kind of the piece on shame, you know, for me has been a big thing. And for me, my journey to discovering my autism was very much a journey of discovering my voice and discovering myself through my writing. A lot of autistic people tend to work best in the written word. It tends to be a way of contacting our inner world. And I guess it's a spacious thing, isn't it? You have the time and the space to find the right word, to hone in on a feeling or a thought, which when you're, you know, kind of in speech can kind of flit and disappear, or often we find it very difficult to identify our feelings at all. And so for me, writing was the way into discovering this self that I had to mask from the world. And so for me, language and languaging has been a massive part of my journey. Being able to language the silenced parts of myself, the parts that I kept hidden in shame. And I realized when I was kind of reflecting on the questions that the others posed, was that masking my magical self and masking my autistic self have been the same process. The crossovers between my autistic self and my magical inclinations, abilities, have been the same. And that was really interesting to me. So I had learned on a very basic level from the very beginning that I was not normal and that was not okay. But that thing that wasn't normal and wasn't okay was both my magical self and my autistic self. And I can't unbraid the two. And so for me, the last few years have been a process of coming out, because to understand myself as autistic rather than flawed, autistic rather than wrong, has been vital. And then to be able to allow myself to be seen as that, but also in my magical beliefs, ideas, practices, which is really tricky in, you know, I listen to you all talking and I think, wow, it sounds really cool where you live. Like, I live in rural Ireland, like I live in a small Catholic village. You don't get to be an out witch here. So being an out witch plus an out autistic person in a very small conservative community is a really tricky thing to do. So it's an experience of great vulnerability, and something that for me has meant that my practice, both magical and creative, is very solitary, and not necessarily by choice, but by need for safety, for not for social approval, but to avoid social trickiness. And so the question I posed was, how do we get to share practice together is multifaceted, because first of all, there has to be a kind of a degree of self-understanding and acceptance before we can kind of come into community. Because often otherwise, if we don't have the language or the understanding for ourselves, it's trickier often to interact with others, because we're dealing with a huge amount of unprocessed or not understood trauma often, especially in group settings. And then there's the trickiness of social interactions, and, you know, each of us neurodivergent people having slightly different comfort levels and ways of interacting socially. And then there's the part that, you know, kind of we get very overwhelmed. Like, I love the fact that you've invited a circle of us here, and it has been really tricky to be able to navigate that socially, knowing when to take one's place, when to speak, what to speak, how much to say, because I'm very used to doing podcast interviews, but for me, it's a one-on-one experience usually. And that is somewhere where I can dive deep and follow my own trains of thought. Whereas in a group situation, it's a very, very different thing. So it's, for most of us who are neurodivergent, we have very rich, alive inner worlds, and it's often interacting with the outer world that is trickier. And yet, when we are able to see that we're not alone, when we're able to interact with each other, when we're able to see ourselves not as wrong or different or strange, but like wonderfully weird, gifted differently, then we're able to weave those gifts together. You know, we were able to weave our magics together, and they are far more powerful than the individual parts that we have. But for so many of us, there is a lot of shame, there is a lot of overwhelm, a lot of fear to overcome, to be able to come out into the world at all, just to do your shopping, just to be able to drive a car or walk down the road. That's big enough, let alone to be able to enter a group space, and then let alone to be able to create magic, to make art, whatever it is, together. Like, they are all very big steps for most of us to do, because we are naturally solitary, and we have learned to be solitary because it's safer. So when we are able to overcome those things, magic happens. And I am so grateful for the times in my life when I've had that, but they are very few and far between. And that does make me sad, because it's not always chosen.
I just really want to repeat something you just said, Lucy. We have learned to be solitary because it's safer. And I think so many of us can apply that to our lives for many various and different reasons. And again, part of the reason that Risa and I hold these circles is to make a brave, safe space where, you know, we are one and not the other. I think I mean, it's heartbreaking to know how much valuable perspective and visionary amazingness that we have lost by making the world unsafe for people who are different. So I'm going to say it one more time. We have learned to be solitary because it's safer. I'm wrecked. I'm wrecked. It's such a succinct way of putting how so many of us feel. I'm wrecked. I love you. Thank you.
I will say we sometimes leave ourselves muted and let the silence hang, and that's an invitation. So if you feel like we're doing that and it's awkward, you're always welcome to step into it. I'm going to open to questions from the community in a minute, but if there was something that you felt you really wanted to respond to, yeah, Sarah.
Yeah, I was just having a desire to sort of, in the spirit of like navigating my own shame, to kind of address the statement I made earlier and kind of draw it in full circle. Because I think there was a part of me that was seeing those two spheres as interactive and not naming that verbally. And so I just wanted to name that. I think what can be so challenging about the way that gatekeeping functions and can function in magical spaces is that there's also the pairing of that joy and sometimes that being seen. And so to untangle the places where you feel pushed away and the places where you feel invited in can be really, really challenging and make that process really hard to emotionally understand. So there's a part of me that felt, I just wanted to make sure that especially Brandy knows that I hear the ways in which you have experienced some of these really challenging things. And I so value that you have brought that to the table. And my statement was mostly to invite in the nuanced complications as I experience it around that emotional core. And then the other thought I just really briefly wanted to throw out is this feeling of like porousness that is sort of how I name my own neurodivergence, which speaks to that overwhelm, because I think I'm going to say we, and if anyone wants to jump in and say that this doesn't apply to them, please do so. But I think that we are actually processing enormous amounts of information that people who may or may not experience neurodivergence aren't having to filter through. And that's the gift too, right? Because we're accessing those pieces. We may be in communication with our non-human friends. We may be in communication with energies and colors and light and the hypervigilance of tiny muscle movements in the face. And that porousness can lead to a need for harder boundaries in community. There's a desire here for me to speak to just this feeling of like, it's like extrasensory perception, and that's why they're so interrelated. There's so much bounty to touch, and then also to filter that out and communicate it clearly and succinctly can be such a huge challenge. So, okay, the last little thing I'll say is I wrote this note that's from Amanda/Lynx, and it's a re-summary of something you said, but it's going to stick with me forever, which is history is hard to remember if your soul knows the truths other truths through lived experience. I found what you were saying about that really, really, really compelling and really mind-blowing. So I wanted to just echo it.
Sarah, can I just say I totally understood what you were saying, and I appreciate that comment because I've felt similar ways, and it's almost weird the dichotomy between being welcomed into a space but also feeling like an outsider, like what Marcella has said. It's very, I would say, destabilizing in a way. So I've had both experiences, and I hold space for that, for both of those that you mentioned.
I think something that I really want to share is that one of the gifts I've found with my neurodiversity is because of that ability to kind of sense the truth, even if it isn't presented. And I think that was one of the things that got me into learning more about tarot and astrology. Like when I was in rehab, I needed something to do and I couldn't hang out with my friends. And it was like 1995 and nobody was going to rehab. It was like pretty new. The thing that always blew my mind was how even with like teaching myself tarot, I didn't have a book, I didn't have a mentor. I just like threw the little booklet away and like just went on intuition and like pattern recognition, noticing colors, because that's what I do. I look at, I notice reoccurring things and images and numbers, and I think that there was something in me that knew the book was bullshit, for lack of a better word. And it's just like with a lot of things. And I know not everybody has that luxury, but I've always been like that my whole life. Was the only thing nobody could take away from me was my mind. They could take everything away from me. And they did, you know, at different varying points, like object wise, physical thing, you know, even my health, but no one could take away my mind. And I really attribute like my autism and ability to, you know that like, okay, there's something under this. I don't know what it is, but my every cell in my being knows what the truth is. Like the truth is not this, what you're telling me. And so maybe just also showing up that when we do recognize, because the other thing too is not everybody likes a truth teller, or they get very upset by it. So sometimes being neurodiverse and being in spaces and you're like, hey, this doesn't feel right, but you don't know why, and you get labeled as kind of being difficult or problematic, or because you just don't necessarily have the facts, the information for them, but you know something's off. So I just want to encourage, you know, other neurodiverse witches and creators who, you might not know exactly why something doesn't feel right or doesn't sit, but also that's why I so heavily have become the type of person that I am today. And that is not perfect by any stretch, but I want to be the person that I wish was there for me. And I say that's why I teach tarot for teens. That's why I try to teach different practices. Like, you don't need the crystal, you don't need the thing, but you need your brain, in the sense of you need your own unique voice and you're the interpreter, you know? So I think the more we can kind of foster those kinds of dynamics within, if we're holding space, you know, for others. And the thing is, you don't always have to be teaching forward, consciously giving instruction. I really am a firm believer in like your example, you being a living testament to why it works, gives other people permission to do the same.
I love your share so much. And just speaking to the pattern recognition, I know in my bio, I put that I think that autism, excuse me, getting tongue-tied, autism and ADHD, I put that they were kind of like my superpowers. And looking at some of the questions, in no way was it meant to romanticize, you know, these conditions, but I just do think of them as, you know, ways that like our brains are information superhighways, and we make connections and see things in ways that people don't. And yeah, it's like I teach a lot just in the way that I read tarot. Like, I don't see how to separate explaining what the cards mean. And I think people pick up a lot, you know, of learning the tarot through that. But then also speaking to being truth tellers, I think there is an aspect of neurodivergence where, at least for myself, it's like I have no chill and no filter. And sometimes I think I can be a little bit in your face with the way that I say things, because it's that level of intensity that we bring, especially if, you know, in learning about my autism diagnosis, your special interests in how intense they are, just being able to channel that and say, you know, like, this means a lot to me. And, you know, like, I've been experiencing a lot in social media lately where it's like pointing out the hypocrisy a little bit of people who say they want to show up for marginalized communities or people with disabilities, and how punishing algorithms and things can be for creators who don't work consistently and push out content consistently, because we're not made that way. But asking the communities who say they show up to support us, like, this is the way that you can support me without donating a dime. You can subscribe to my YouTube channel. You can share in your stories. You can share bookmark posts. Like, these are little things that show, your support and show that our voices are valuable. So it's like, I think I've been a little bit of a fly in the ointment and a pain in the ass, but I think that's really important, is, being those, those truth tellers, those, people who really confront some of those hypocrisies that we're seeing, where the most marginalized among us really do need to be lifted up the most in these times. So just really been feeling that lately, especially in this year where it's, in numerology, it's ruled by Venus, and, it's meant to reflect our values and collaboration and just mutual support, really coming from your place of truth. I think that's important for us as neurodivergent people.
Oh, hi, good afternoon. I'm Tanya Mark Oviedo. I use the pronouns they, them. I'm on Tonga land, also known as Long Beach, California, and it's an honor to be here. And I just want to thank each one of you, the panelists, for your shares. And as a curanderex, brujex, and spiritual programmer that has switched gears from teaching high school of 20 years to, retraining, refocusing my lens to being of service to my community and the collective, I would like to know, as a breathwork facilitator and as such, are there things that I can be doing in holding space for our community? And if so, could the panelists speak to, are there ways in which I'm handling group or one-on-one work that would be more inclusive, loving, compassionate, whatever it is that would help to support the spaces, is kind of my question. Each one of you have such beautiful magic to bring that I wish I could ask it individually, but I understand on a group level. I just, thank you so much to each of you for sharing your magic, and it's so wonderful to be in such a transparent, loving space for the last hour and a half of just being amongst like-minded community, and I really appreciate that. So if you could speak to what tools could be added to spaces to support, that would be amazing. And Ashe, thank you so much.
Thank you, Tanya Mark. Thank you so much.
I've got a few kind of bits and pieces that I've found very helpful myself, and I just wanted to bring in some terminology here which might be very useful for people. So the first thing is demand avoidance. So when you are in a class and you get told to do something, it's not even a rational, logical, it's an anxiety-based response. And so in classes, it's often very helpful to how you frame your language. So I invite you to, or giving a couple of options when you're setting up an exercise, so that sense of impending anxiety and a need to avoid the demand is relieved from us. The other thing to be really aware of is when giving any sort of feedback in a class situation, many of us, both on the autism spectrum, but also with ADHD, struggle with something called rejection sensitive dysphoria, which means that if we perceive something that you're saying as in any way critical to us, it feels like physical pain. It is as though you are being stabbed in the guts. There isn't an ability to logically say, oh, they're just trying to help me, or they're trying to give me useful feedback or constructive criticism. It goes straight into the nervous system, straight into fight or flight, and can lead to massive kind of reliving of trauma, shutdown, need to escape, which to the teacher or the facilitator can seem like an extreme response to, I was just trying to help them. I was just trying to give some useful feedback to how they were doing so they can learn. And actually, it is so triggering but to the outside, it does seem just like so disproportionate to what has happened. But I just need to speak from the inside of that, which is that it is as though somebody has stabbed you. I mean, and your system goes into, how do I keep myself safe now? So those two things I would say are very helpful to understand when you're dealing with neurodivergent folk. And also, just as much as possible, offering information in as many ways as possible. So always having written as well as audio instruction, invitations, directions, as not just written, but also photographic, so that there are several ways that people can access and feel safe, and that there are things that they can focus on when they might be experiencing high anxiety. There is something that can anchor them back into the space in a way that feels safe. So for many of us, we are hyperlexic, which means that we read as a way of stimming, as a way to center and settle ourselves. We will read every piece of information that we can in a room as a way of centering ourselves. And so to be aware of what you kind of share in the space, because often the energy is too big, the unknown is too big, the unspoken is too big. So if we can have somewhere where we can safely land, that feels familiar, that we can rest, that might be kind of helping us to understand what is expected of us, what is expected in this space, that can be extremely helpful.
Thank you so much. Those are so concrete and useful. I want to be really loyal to our container that we've set. I want to have all these conversations more and in more depth with all of you, but I also want to release you from this sensory overload, and want to kind of let us spin out from here. But I'm so like, I feel so much hope from being here with you. I do feel that same feeling that was expressed here, that sometimes you can walk into a magical space and feel so at home and so safe, and then suddenly there'll be something that jabs you out, that makes you feel deeply like a piece of you isn't welcome. And we're just trying really hard to learn from as many people as possible, to make spaces that allow us to get to learn from you. You are the people we've been missing. So thank you for sharing yourselves with us. When I woke up this morning, I was half in a dream, and these words were yelling in a circle in my head. I think they were directed at J.K. Rowling, but I'll share them with you here. That our inclusion is an intention, and it's a spell of protection. Trans women are here in our circle, in our spell of protection. Witches, the neurodivergent, all of the marginalized people and races and religions. Our goal is to make a circle that is a spell of protection, and to just not fuck up too much on our journey of trying to make a better world. We love you.
I was going to read some Maria Sabina, but instead, and because we've already gone over time, and again, we really want to respect the framework that we laid out in the beginning. So I will just say, it is safer and easier to be solitary, but this is how we make the revolution, is in community. So it might not be safe all the time, but let's keep making these spaces that are. Let's keep making these spaces that are. Thank you all so much for your honesty and your transparency, and for your advice and for your magic. Thank you so much.
You must be a witch.
The Missing Witches podcast is brought to you by the Missing Witches Coven. Join us right now on patreon.com/missingwitches. Blessed fucking be.